source mandate. I'm working on an open source project now that has, there was an RFP, there's a RTM that had 610 when they down to, responsibility matrix,
requirements?
yes, requirement matrix, 610 items on it, of which I don't agree with some of them. Okay? The RFP is out there, you have to meet the contract, it's using open source, it's generating open source. But it still has all the other problems that any other software has in that it's not a crowdsourced development system. Does that make sense? There are all these contractual things. Open source does not imply that the best design will win. None of that is implied by open source. For others to change it later may be a possibility, and that's where open source is good at. But when you begin open source software, it can be based on shifting sands like every other data project is.
I think to answer the question of the voting, to go back to that, I mean, I think certainly if it was open and everybody could look at the code, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So, and there wouldn't be anybody that could say, there might be something in there that's doubling the votes. Do I believe that's happening? Probably not. But you know what? The fact that we can even say it's a remote possibility shows that probably would have been better if it was done differently.
I just want to agree that if it was programmed so that every 10th ballot is 1 + 1 = 3 versus 1 + 1 = 0, you could verify that. You could look at this software and you could verify it. But if it's a bunch of ones and zeros that were compiled, nobody in this room could tell what that programmer did out there on the West Coast. Or
You can't even see the ones and zeros.
Okay, I got to do one last rejoinder, and the answer is, yeah, they can, and that's what IV&V, verification and validation, and what good testing is about. 'Cause I've been on the testing side. Is it harder when you can't see the source code? Oh, yeah. Is it impossible? No. That's what good test design is about. So it's not impossible to have a good product without the source being open. I think everybody in the room agrees that it's certainly more transparency in something like that, the better.
How do you bring up the open source platform to a board of directors without them throwing you out? How do you kind of ease them into this idea?
Beg for forgiveness
You
later.
whip out your Android phone and say, look, that's. They're starting to take iPhones back. I mean, you pull out the TV set, you walk them out to their car, and you point at the console on it, and you say, this stuff's everywhere. Why aren't you?
But it's a good question, and that's what's happening in a lot of, especially for big for-profit corporations, is there is an internal sales job associated with promoting the open source model. Again, it goes back to culture change. Somebody has to be the first guy to come in and say, hey, look, there's a different way to do business. And that's sometimes a tough sell, but it needs to be done.
In our case, the CIO of the different state and hospital, they need to propose to use an open source solution. And I think, like you say, it's a point of reference. They show, hey, the VA is using that system. It's very proven, so it's basically doing okay for many years. So they can have some reference, but at the same time, we are in the time right now that we are changing. We are kind of evolution of that business model, so it's going to be much easier for you to propose that in the future. But it's always good before proposing to find point of references. So that's an idea.
Yeah, by the way, the first guy who went into Gillette and said, hey, let's give away the razor and just sell the blades. He had a tough initial sell too. Okay. But notice how that worked out for them?
yeah, they're like,
Okay. What do you mean you're going to give? What do you mean you're going to give something away? No, just give away the razor. We'll be fine. Same thing. I mean, give away the code. there's maintenance, there's customization,
Training.
there's training, there's a whole world of services surrounding that code. But it's the same as the first guy that went into Gillette. We need answers, what that is.
Chris, do you have?
Sure, so this is maybe kind of a general question, but so you sort of have, I guess I want to talk about the computer science, software engineering divide that sort of exists, which is categorized a lot by the culture of academia and the culture of industry. And I'm wondering if you can talk about ways in which you think open source can help to bridge the sort of the computer science divide and the software engineering divide. And I guess that kind of goes into a lot of the things we've been talking about project management and how to do project management and teach project management and how to see software as more than just the code, but actually a process. How do you bring that into academia in a way that's going to make people in academia comfortable enough to accept it? How do you bring them in? Am I making any sense? Is that the core of a question?
I'll answer the first part of that. So kind of going all back to, for a company, we obviously want engineers and good engineers. So for someone who's worked on an open source project that is used in the real world, if their patches gets accepted to the project, it's been approved by how many ever developers are working on that project. So they get, they're learning from that experience and exactly what's the right code to submit to projects, how to submit it, all that kind of stuff. That knowledge from, at least my experience of people we've hired who have that kind of experience, they are much higher in the ranks that they get hired by a company than if someone who's never done it is kind of been always, isolated to just the small kind of projects or test projects for schools, stuff like that. Someone who's actually interacted with the bigger open source communities, interacted with other developers through mailing lists and all that kind of stuff. Just that knowledge of the interaction with them is priceless for an engineer to have.
Okay, today, they were mentioning about Git or versioning control. Maybe it's hard for the student to learn as part of their career, but actually it's harder if they need to learn that when they need to start working, because it's going to affect their performance as a developer. So it's like start working as an office manager and you know how to use a word processor. You don't have an idea about how to use Excel. So that kind of the bottom line, you need some kind of pre-knowledge in order to be more productive. And that's, I think, the academic can bring that to the program and say, okay, at least you need to know versioning control, QA, testing. That's going to, like he said, they need employees, or we need employees that can be productive. Because when they hire the employees, they have the project already. So sometimes they don't have the time to wait 3 or 4 months until the person knows the tools.
I guess academia has sort of traditionally been very reluctant to teach those kinds of skills. I think you usually hear people saying that that's specific, that's industry's responsibility to teach you once you get out the door. We'll give you the theory, we'll make you a smart thinker, whatever that is, and then we'll send you out the door, and industry will train you on the specific tools of the day, because the great institution of academic learning within the computer science tradition is not about whatever specifically needs to be learned today.
Maybe that was true years ago. But now the competition to find a job is really high. So the most you can have in your portfolio is the better. So,
Yeah.
I think it's certainly a concern I've seen from Professor Mayotte. I figure if you teach sort of teach someone to fish, they'll learn English. If you teach someone to dig, they'll be able to learn anything, which for some people is true, but on the other hand, there probably needs to be a little more balance. I mean, some schools are different, some are, have more, and some have less, but I think it is important that there be at least access to training in the basic tools, the version control, various testing infrastructures, and knowing how to do that, and teaching them, the guts of how memory allocation works and how, C programming and things like that. Even if they're all doing web stuff, having that underpinning of understanding how it actually works makes them so much a better developer in the future. And I'd like to see schools focus on more of the software engineering, even for the more advanced theory folks, because we've got folks at Kitware that are very advanced theory, they're developing algorithms and computer vision and things like that, and they still have to write code occasionally.
And test.
And test it. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
Bridging the gap between science and engineering, probably too much for us today.
Oh, come on, no, wait.
However, it is true, from our standpoint, Lewis said it best, I think, earlier in his presentation, that he was worried about squeezing the students, but he's basically teaching them to drink from the fire hose. Okay? And part of that is teaching them how to learn new tools, how to learn, because the tools, that you can teach them right now, and part of the reason why academia takes that approach is because they realize how fast things are moving, and that if they spend a lot of time teaching one tool, by the time the people get out there, it'll be obsolete. But teaching people to learn new languages and tools and adapt to them is a valuable skill. Now, picking some relevant ones along the way, probably a good idea, but getting somebody to a point where they can pick up, look at a new language and understand it in the context of everything else they've learned, pick up a new language and run with it, that's a great skill, because they're going to need it. You know as well as I how fast things pop up. So, learn to learn.
One last comment.
Yeah, it's more of a comment to add to what Sam was just saying, or to answer that one. I think there's just a lot of opportunities with open source software to teach additional skills around open standards or around industry standards. So you can use two open source systems, for example, a business HR system and a merge system, and suddenly you can write H+7 interfaces and learn how to deal with communications coding and protocols and security. So there's tons of opportunities, maybe within the world of informatics and healthcare especially, where those areas of intersection come together around open source, because at any other level of university would have a hard time creating an environment where that can be impacted in a lab situation. So thinking of ways where those intersections of how data moves, taxonomies that might be wrapped around some of the other technologies that are out there, and being able to use those to an advantage in a classroom environment or in labs afterwards, or in little open source competitions that, everyone's fairly equal at that point. It doesn't matter that you're a student, it doesn't matter that it's in a 10-week course period. It can be accomplished if you, as Fanny said earlier, take some small piece, a little bite, and submit that. Suddenly you've made a difference and it's got real world application.
So on this, let me thank the panel. Thank you very much for your insightful comments, and please continue enjoying the festival.